I have a very strong stance on all of that, more philosophically.
Yeah, that's what you're here for. We want to hear yours.
Well, no. So what we're diving into is the chaos in the world, and actually just like big shout out to our community as a whole for helping us actually, we kind of put the word out sometimes, occasionally here and there, like what's on your guys' mind. And when they speak up and they tell us what they're thinking, it helps us get a sense of the barometer of the room.
The last 2 weeks have been crazy.
It's been crazy.
We saw
Let's talk about what we've seen in
Boris
the world.
Johnson. Boris Johnson resigned.
Yeah, the Prime Minister of fucking United Kingdom.
It resigns. We had the former Prime Minister of Japan get assassinated. We've had some kind of run on Chinese banks, which still seem unclear, like why that's happening. At least I haven't dug deep into enough. Sri Lanka just failed as a country.
Sri Lanka collapsed.
Is defunct. And the Germans are running out of gas and oil. Like one of the major developed nations is now going to be like, please don't use as much energy. So like all of these things happening last few weeks just gives you the feel that like what the fuck is going on.
Sri Lanka, they asked the citizens to first of all, they just turned off power for 14 hours a day.
They had already
done that before the collapse. It's so bad.
14 hours.
Yeah, and just telling people nothing, no power.
God damn. I don't know. How do you guys react to that? When you see these isolated cases that appear to be interconnected through macro, which is again back to our previous point, why we're all paying so much attention to macro. These feel like isolated individual cases of chaos. The fucking fact that somebody's getting assassinated that led
in a country with very little gun violence.
Oh yeah, very little.
So I have an educated.
Didn't he make the gun?
He made the gun with two pipes and yeah. So I have an educated take, and then I have my tinfoil.
Give me your degen take.
Well, let me just start with the educated one. The educated one is Ray Dalio wrote a book on this. He wrote a book called The Changing World Order, and what
you revisited that recently.
Yeah,
right?
I'm maybe 3/4 of the way through that, and what he's talking about is how a lot of the Western world right now is past the peak of their power, right? And we're entering stage 5, what he calls it is, or we're actually in stage 5, which is right before stage 6. Stage 6 is revolt, and civil war,
which you've talked about for years, in our own
And
personal
dollar
discourse.
milkshake theory, promotes that the sign that it's playing out is that you see revolt and civil unrest,
right? And we're also seeing revolt and civil unrest. So I think Dalio is describing this already. He's saying this is
I just
to be
don't want to
expected.
see it in America because it'll be the most bloody and violent here than anywhere.
It doesn't have to be, but
I would love that.
But it can, sure. Yeah. Sure, and I think that's the smart take is well, this is to be expected. Things move in long-term cycles. This is nearing the end of a long-term cycle. My tinfoil hat is thinking this must be freaking orchestrated by China. And my thought, let's isolate Sri. First of all, I'm a believer that the big game here is China trying to become the world power.
You're playing 4D chess right now in your mind.
I like that you're coming to my side of the table.
This.
Steven's not here to.
No. I love this.
Not even playing 4D chess. I'm playing
But you're
drool on myself. I'm playing drool on myself. Checkers. The tinfoil hat says China is the big game. Is China becoming the world power, and they're going to do what it takes to get there. And I think them going zero COVID is part of this. It's choking supply chains. I think they're seeing the turmoil here in the United States, and they're seeing here's an opportunity, and they're going to try to exacerbate the turmoil here in the United States. Part of one way they're going to do that is by choking supply chains more. And I think where this really ends, and I can even give more examples, but where this ends is China taking over Taiwan and us not doing anything about it, or doing something about it and starting World War III. But if we don't do anything about it, the issue with that is, most of the semiconductors come from Taiwan. They're going to control the compute power of the world. That's an issue.
Yeah.
But let me back up before we go that route. Another little feather in this little tinfoil cap I'm wearing is within Sri Lanka alone. they were already like pretty defunct to begin with. I think 95% of their tax revenue was going to debt service. So they didn't have any money. Like they didn't really have any leeway to do anything.
That's
but they
terrible.
were still building ports, they were building bridges, and guess who was building that? China.
Yeah.
China was building that, and like
So they had him by the balls the whole time.
and the idea behind that tinfoil is that China wants another like port for their navy, and like that's a good port. It'd be like off India.
And don't they have a pretty weak navy?
Yeah, I don't think they have much of a navy, but like,
Yeah.
wouldn't it be kind of nice to have like
To have a
a
little-
I mean, it's
station
part of their
right there?
Belt and Road Initiative, right? Like same thing, like a little economic imperialism, not like physical imperialism,
Yes,
but economic.
Okay, so they build this port, and they're just like, yeah, don't worry about the deal terms necessarily. You know, like, yeah, sure, pay us when you can. And it's like, who ever lends like that? Nobody ever lends without like assessing, you know, like creditor, you know, availability to pay back.
Yeah.
Well, I think the idea is that they don't pay back, and then you're like, well, now we own this port, and it's going to be a military port.
Thank
and
you.
We
That's
also
what I'm
happen to
saying.
like
Sorry,
dredge
but wasn't
the
that
depth.
America's MO for a long time?
Yeah, we used to read books on what was it?
The economic hitman.
Confessions of an Economic Hitman.
Confessions of
We
an
in
Economic
our college liberal stages.
We used to be conspiracy theorists.
Well, here
Straight up.
I've reached that point.
Yeah, man. Welcome to the club.
So I'm just seeing all these like little games happen, and the other thing that I'm noticing, right? So like Sri Lanka defaulted on $4 billion. That's like such a small amount, really. In like
Wait, I'm in shock right now. Do you know what the population of Sri Lanka is?
no,
Guess.
I don't know.
Guess.
I don't even like. I don't know.
probably
Just-
probably India-esque. Like it's probably densely
80
populated.
million.
No, more.
This is an island, guys, off the coast of India. What do you think? They just pack it up to
Yeah,
the sky?
look-
Well,
India.
Indonesia.
I
does.
was hoping you guys would say like, what, 2 million?
What is
it's
it?
22 million.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. It's still a lot.
I don't know. I think of Indonesia. It's
Yeah,
like a
same.
Indonesia is a different deal.
Oh, huge. Okay, sorry. So it's not that big, but I was
That's a big nation.
But $4 billion to collapse, I was thinking like, shit, Chamath could just bail him out right now by himself. So $4 billion, and then the country's just collapsed. Like, come on, that's what I was thinking. But then, you know, I was also thinking like, well, that works right in the hand. Works right in the hand of the big game.
I like tinfoil, Eric.
All right.
This
So
is
before
great.
we get in the full tinfoil,
Yeah.
like I generally look at all these things happening, and I think the bad road to go down is to just get the feel that like everything's collapsing. The world is ending. Everything's going wrong. Like I don't think that's the right path, because like as you say, the world is ending. You could also say that like
The right path of thinking or the right path of accuracy of what is happening?
well, like you could also say with accuracy that the world's never been in a better place. Like we're launching
Steven
rockets. Like yeah, you could make the counter argument for like on several different measures, like even just like general living standards and like even the poorest of the poor.
Undeniably true.
Right. So you can make that case. So I
Undeniably
don't
true.
think, mashing all these events together and just saying the world is ending or the world is amazing is the best way to go. Like we've often talked about like a framework on a country by country basis.
So purple. I want to keep going on
I-
tinfoil.
Could
I'm going to go
not-
purple and then we'll go.
Go purple.
Let me
but
come
I
back.
just have to say this is refreshing because most people just want to like pack it all together.
And it doesn't feel good when you say like, because you can get trapped and be like, the world is going down this route. But like, I think it's better to take a country by country basis. And like, we've often used the framework, geography, number one, when it comes to evaluating countries and where they sit in the geopolitical area, like geography, number one, demographics, number two, let's put like resources, number three, and like how can you produce food and energy, which also kind of ties back to geography, your military, how strong is your military? And like, that also relates to geography, probably your financial strength in the world. And I think that framework is a better way to evaluate all of these scenarios, right? Like if you look at Sri Lanka, they owe debt most likely in dollars, and like they suffer from like the fact that the United States has a very strong, financial place in the world, and they have to owe money in dollars, and they're probably trapped. You look at Germany; they haven't necessarily secured the resources they need for their country, basic energy, right? So like I think when you map it out on a framework, you can see that each
So
of these.
funny. Trump called that one.
Yeah, and to his credit, he called
To
it,
his credit.
in front of the EU.
Oh, yeah.
And actually, I think a speech
I've
in the
watched that
UN.
video.
There's a
In
video.
front of NATO, I think.
Yeah, NATO. No, it was in the UN.
UN.
He gave a speech and he basically said like, the Germans are
Buck
setting
up.
themselves up for being held hostage by the Russians. And then the video pans to the German delegation, and they're laughing.
I don't care what you think, but you don't want to negotiate with that guy.
Right. So anyway, he was definitely right on that.
On that one.
I don't think he used the right tactics or the right strategy.
Totally.
But like he was certainly right on that.
Perceptive.
And
It was
I think
perceptive.
people should give him more credit on that in that regard for sure. So anyway, I think it just makes sense to kind of use the framework and see that each country is in its own, different framework on where they sit on those factors.
All right, we'll put this in your framework. Tinfoil back on.
Stick this in your framework.
Yeah, and smoke it. Okay. You said Sri Lanka, population 22 mil. I just looked up.
I'm blown away by that.
Okay. It's 22 mil. It's neither small nor large. It's 22 million. Like Ukraine is 44 million.
Right.
Not that big. We just shipped another 1.4 billion to them on last Tuesday.
What's the total at, by
Did
the
we
way?
really?
Yeah, we shipped another 1.4 billion as if 1.4 billion is nothing. And
Can I just show you the size of this country? Like, look at it relative to India.
It's a dot.
It's a dot.
It's on a little island. But yeah, okay, so it's half the size of Ukraine. How much money are we giving to Ukraine? And my question is it's like, it's interesting how the United States is going to pick and choose these humanitarian issues that we're going to get behind. Why? At tinfoil's on. It's like, there's a bigger game at play. Why does that one matter so much that we're going to continue dishing out cash versus this one? It's like, let it fail.
Well, I think like we can call them elites or just like the political class tends to frame the argument in terms of authoritarian versus democracy. Like, which is going to win? Are authoritarians going to win, or is democracy going to win? And can we preserve our liberal world order where like liberty, not like democratic liberal, but just like, having liberty over you as a human being and your rights, does it exist? And I think they put it in that framework, and it feels, to like a political elite, it feels like an existential crisis when a democratic country like Ukraine gets invaded, and you also allow an authoritarian regime to come in and like, well, that sets an example and a precedent, and that could probably lead into our Taiwan discussion at some point.
That's what I want to. Now I want to get to World War III.
Click it. Click it.
Dink. World War III. So,
What does that take to start? What's the shot heard around the world
Taiwan.
of World War III?
Taiwan, I think.
Really?
Well,
That's
let's talk
the
about
one.
it. Let's talk about it. And here's how.
I think a lot of people are going to be apprehensive.
Well, here's how I feel it playing out. Let me go back to.
It's an expected shot versus the shot that was not expected.
Let me go back
for World
like
War
a couple
I,
steps
for example.
back, like in a Ray Dalio framework. He says that like when Western nations that have had like incredible prosperity for a long time get to a point where they're heavily indebted, the tax income does not like make up for the expenditures that they need to continue around the government. You get this like infighting, and you see that happening now. He calls it the internal order, and he says when the internal order gets disrupted, what you often find is that you see polarization, and you see these guys, the populist political figures emerge on either side, the left and the right, and you're seeing that today, right? You're seeing
Boris Johnson, and
then like you'll see Sanders
Bernie.
and Elizabeth Warren, et cetera.
Yeah.
Like, and these all speak to sort of this like stage 5 environment, and that's what we're in. I think like where I want to take this is you get populism rising, you get infighting. I think China likes to see like, tinfoil's back on. China likes to see.
Love the illustration.
Yeah.
China likes to see the infighting, and they want to go as far as they can to the point where America is about to go civil war mode, and then they'll be like, "Oh, just walk into Taiwan, take it." Because
Yeah.
I think if they were to go now,
Don't you feel like we're quite a ways away from that? Or
I got,
do you
I got some
actually feel
timelines
like it's,
for you.
Yeah, give me a timeline.
All right, so Xi Jinping has this thing called the Great China Rejuvenation, and it's a plan to reach the full rejuvenation by I think 2049, which represents the 100-year anniversary of the CPP being formed.
So it's completely arbitrary out of his ass. Okay.
Yeah,
go
but
ahead.
that's his
the
plan. It's
goal.
important to know what his
Sure.
plan is. It's also important to know that he probably won't be alive
Right.
by 2049. So, okay, maybe don't work backwards from there. What other date could we work backwards from? 2027 is also an important date. It's the 100-year anniversary of the People's Liberation Army, of it being formed. And part of that includes a lot of capability increasements by 2027. And if you look at them, they're primarily centered around, can we take over Taiwan? So if you kind of work backwards from that, you might be right that it could be within the next 5 years and waiting for a particular.
Don't feed my tinfoil. Like, let that die.
And part of that rejuvenation is explicitly going back to like historical territories, which includes Taiwan. So yeah,
Can I ask you a question? So you talked about the time frame. I like that, and I think those dates probably do have significance. My question is, like, I came with such a middle curve take on Taiwan, just as a standalone. Like, okay, so they're going to take it over in semiconductors. Okay, fine. Like, what are the other ramifications? Like, if they do take Taiwan, like, how important is that?
Yeah, I think there's some other context we could probably add in, but I want to get to some of those before we go into that. Like, I think it's important to understand like the Taiwanese people, like how do they feel about this? Because I think it sets the framework for like where could this go and what should the U.S.'s strategy be.
Very good. And I want to just, to preface that, like, I think it's important to note that like a lot of Ukrainians, like when I was in San Francisco, I was like talking to a Ukrainian woman when Crimea was taken, and she's like, no, I grew up there. Like, we think of ourselves as Russian.
Right.
So that takeover was like good, like for the locals. Like, they were like, okay, cool, yeah. And I thought of it as this atrocity because that's sort of what I was being fed.
But you could also think of it as an atrocity as like someone in the Russian army taking over your brothers, your genetic brothers. Like, I think that's how that it's thought of. In Taiwan is I think a little different. Like, there's a rise in Taiwanese identity where I think Ukrainians have that, but I think in particular like Taiwanese have that, and I think they understand that they're on different political trajectories than China, and there's not necessarily like a push for unification. I don't think they want to go back to China, because if you look at Hong Kong, Hong Kong is like a perfect example of what Taiwan's future might look like, right? This separate area under a separate administration, but you see that China took it back from UK and said, we'll keep it separate. But slowly over time, their rights are diminished and increasingly diminished.
Right, it's being assimilated.
Right, it's being assimilated. So I don't think there's this push for any kind of unification. And then there's not necessarily a push for independence, because what does that mean? Does that mean going to war? So there's like this like of the status quo. They really want the status quo. And so you're
in and of itself is so complex, what you just said. Like, to live in that state of mind, like, that's not just like a Passover comment. That's really difficult, but go ahead.
Yeah, and so I think, what was your question, Eric, about like what beyond the semiconductors?
Yeah, like what are the ramifications if China takes over Taiwan? Like, how devastating
really,
is that? Because like, if it is devastating, then the world will step in, and then you'll see like these.
To the previous point to that, it is a trigger for an escalation,
right? And I
that
think,
requires multiple continents to get involved.
And I think you're already seeing, like, Nick brought this up in our chat, or maybe somewhere like in person. He was saying, like, I already see the factions becoming clear, where you have like the Axis powers of China, North Korea, Russia, Iran versus the Western world.
Yeah, we call it the team players. I think that's a new axis of evil over there. And I think the question, to your point, is will Japan and will Australia and will South Korea join the fight? So I guess a little context, like the US has this protocol of like strategic ambiguity when it comes to Taiwan. And the initial idea was, I think this is like in the late 70s, early 80s, where we're not going to say what we're going to do. And that does two things. It keeps China at bay because it's supposed to deter them, because we might step in.
What if?
But it also keeps Taiwan from like egging on their older parent and poking the bear and getting too far for their britches and
Because we might not step
we,
in.
we might not step in. So it keeps both. It kind of deters people to
I like it.
stay
It's a good position.
in the
good
status
position.
quo. But you could argue that like that could be irrelevant now because
It is.
now China is becoming less risk adverse. You see with Hong Kong is like
Correct.
again a great example.
Sure.
Like them kind of issuing economic like coercion over Australia. Like they are showing in like foreign relations that they are not as risk adverse as they used to, and they're increasing military capabilities. So you could argue that that stance is not so much relevant anymore. And they're clearly signaling this. I mean, they're running consistent sorties, like military aircraft going into their Taiwan's like air identification zone. I don't know what the technical term is. And I think they're doing it for multiple reasons. Like they want to, one, practice. Two, they want to desensitize the US and Taiwan from, this is just another one of those like practice runs where at night they just fly 40 planes, and then when it comes to close to the coast, they just veer off. And they also like are wasting Taiwanese resources because every time they fly one of those planes, Taiwan has to like assemble like a scramble team, and they're just using their resources and depleting them over time. And it's also like a political signal. Like anytime we sell military to them, they might run one of those to say like, we're not deterred